It begins like the kind of day you don't remember. A warm morning, a bright Mediterranean sky, the ordinary music of a Roman city waking up. Sandals tapping stone. Water splashing in fountains. A vendor shouting the price of bread. Children laughing somewhere behind a courtyard wall. And above it all, Mount Vesuvius sits in the distance like it always has. Quiet, green, almost gentle. The kind of mountain you stop noticing because it has never moved in your lifetime. Pompeii lives in its shadow the way people live beside anything familiar. They build homes. They build dreams. They build a future. They don't look up and think, this could end us. Because Vesuvius doesn't look like a monster. It looks like a neighbor. But that morning, something is wrong, so subtly wrong that most people ignore it. A tremor that lasts only seconds. A cup that rattles against a table. A dog that won't stop barking. A mule that refuses to move. And deep inside the mountain, pressure is building. Not the kind of pressure you feel in the air. The kind of pressure that has been trapped for centuries. Waiting. Compressing. Growing. Like a fist closing slowly. The people of Pompeii have no word for what's coming. No understanding of volcanoes. No warning system. No concept of an eruption that can erase a city. So when the first sound finally breaks through, when the mountain releases that first violent roar, most people don't run. They stare. They squint at the horizon. Because what rises into the sky doesn't look like smoke. It looks like a column from another world. But towering. Endless. And as it climbs higher, the sunlight begins to disappear. Ash begins to fall like gray snow. Then the stones start falling. Then rooftops begin collapsing. Then the air becomes impossible to breathe. And the city realizes, too late, that the sky itself has turned against them. By the time Pompeii understands what Vesuvius truly is, the day is already ending. And the mountain is only getting started. Welcome back to history told the way it actually felt. Not like a textbook. Not like a timeline of dates and ruins. But like a day you can almost hear, almost smell, almost survive. Today's story is Pompeii. A Roman city that didn't fall to an army. Didn't collapse in war. Didn't fade slowly. It vanished in a single disaster so sudden and so complete that it froze human life in place. For nearly 2,000 years, Pompeii stayed buried under ash. Its streets sealed. Its houses preserved. Its final moments locked inside layers of volcanic stone. And when it was rediscovered, it wasn't just archaeology. It was time travel. Because Pompeii is one of the only places on Earth where we can still see the ancient world with almost painful clarity. The graffiti, the food, the homes, the temples, the fingerprints of ordinary people, and also the fear, the rush, the frantic attempts to escape, the bodies caught mid-motion, the faces turned toward doors they never reached. This is why Pompeii matters. Not because it's ancient, because it's human, because it shows how quickly normal life can become catastrophe, and how every civilization, no matter how confident, no matter how advanced, still lives at the mercy of forces it cannot negotiate with. For the next hour, we're going to walk through Pompeii's final day step by step. We'll build the city before the eruption. We'll meet its people, its politics, its pleasures. Then we'll watch the first warning signs. The strange tremors. The nervous animals. The shift in the air. And then the eruption. The ash. The falling stone. The collapse of roofs. The darkness at noon. The panic in the streets. And finally, the wave that ended everything. And when we reach the end, we'll ask a question that still haunts historians. Did anyone actually understand what was happening? Before it was too late? Before Pompeii becomes a tragedy? It is a place full of life. A Roman city near the Bay of Naples, where the sea breeze carries salt and fish and the smell of warm bread. Pompeii is not Rome. It doesn't have the empire's power, but it has something almost as important. Comfort. A feeling that the world is stable. Its streets are lined with shops. Bakeries with ovens still hot at dawn. Wine bars where men argue and laugh and gamble. Bathhouses where steam fills the rooms and conversation flows like water. Public fountains that splash constantly, feeding households. And behind high walls, hidden from the street, there are villas, private courtyards, gardens, frescoes painted in bright reds and deep blues, scenes of gods, lovers, heroes, art so rich that it still stuns modern eyes. Pompeii is a city of contrast. On one street you can see luxury, marble tables, imported perfumes, expensive mosaics. On the next street you see the ordinary, cramped apartments, simple bread, working hands stained by labor. Slaves carry water, sweep floors, deliver goods. Freedmen run shops, trying to rise. Merchants shout in the marketplace. Priests lead rituals in temples. And above it all, the city feels protected by Rome's peace. People wake up thinking tomorrow will come. Because for most people, history feels like it moves slowly, even in ancient times. And Pompeii has been growing for years. It has survived political change. It has survived wars. It has survived shifting rulers. And now, by the 1st century, it feels like a permanent part of the Roman world. But here's what the city cannot see. Its most powerful neighbor isn't Rome. It's Vesuvius. And Vesuvius doesn't look dangerous. Not to them. It's green. It's fertile. Its slopes produce grapes and olives. Its soil is rich. Farmers love it. And when people look at it, they don't think volcano. They think mountain. Because in Roman memory, Vesuvius has been quiet for as long as anyone can remember. Generations have lived beneath it without seeing fire. So the idea that it can explode is not part of daily thought. Yet the earth has been warning them. 17 years earlier, in AD 62, Pompeii is hit by a massive earthquake. Buildings collapse. Temples crack. Walls fall. People die. The shock ripples across the region. And for a moment, everyone thinks the world is ending. But then the shaking stops. The city rebuilds. Because that's what humans do. They rebuild. And slowly the earthquake becomes a memory. A scar. A story older people tell. Some repairs are still unfinished even years later, but life returns. Markets open. Homes are restored. Business continues. Because the human brain has a powerful skill. Forgetting danger once it becomes inconvenient. Now, the earthquake was probably a warning of the volcano's awakening. But no one makes that connection. They don't have modern geology. They don't understand pressure systems beneath mountains. They interpret earthquakes as the mood of the gods, not the shifting of magma. So Pompeii continues. And as it continues, it becomes even more alive. More confident. More comfortable. Until the summer of AD 79 approaches. And the signs begin to return. Small tremors. Minor shakes. The kind that make cups rattle. The kind that make dogs nervous. The kind that everyone shrugs off. Because in Campania, tremors aren't unusual. They're background noise. And that background noise becomes the perfect cover for catastrophe. Because disaster rarely arrives with trumpets. It arrives with whispers. And Pompeii, in the days before the eruption, is still living its ordinary life. People are planning dinners. Planning business. Planning festivals. Planning futures. And none of them know their city has already begun counting down. In the last days before Pompeii dies, the city is busy, loud, and full of small human dramas. People argue over money, over love, over politics, over gods, over the price of bread. In the marketplace, vendors stack figs and olives. Fishmongers display their catch. Wine sellers pour small samples into clay cups. A man points to a wall where someone has scratched graffiti, an insult, a joke, a name. Pompeii is a place where private life spills into public space. The streets are not just roads. They are stages. And on those stages, Romans live with confidence. Because Rome is strong. Because the empire feels stable. Because the sea brings commerce. Because the soil is fertile. Because tomorrow has always come before. But in Pompeii, the city is also living inside a pressure cooker. Politically, it's a Roman colony with local elites competing for status. Public buildings are sponsored by wealthy patrons who want their names carved into stone. Elections matter. Not because Pompeii will change the empire, but because prestige is everything. Who funds a bathhouse? Who pays for a new fountain? Who throws the best games in the amphitheater? These are the questions that shape reputation. And while the elites play their status games, ordinary people work. Slaves clean houses. Freedmen run shops. Artisans hammer metal. Bakers knead dough. And in the evenings, families gather in courtyards, eating bread dipped in oil, laughing, telling stories. It's not a perfect world. There's inequality. There's cruelty. There's violence. But it's normal. And that normality is what makes the ending so haunting. Because Pompeii doesn't die during a festival. It doesn't die during war. It dies during ordinary life. Now, in the days and weeks leading up to the eruption, subtle warnings are everywhere. The earth shakes more often. Light tremors. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to be noticed and then ignored. Some wells change. Some water sources behave strangely. Animals act nervous. But people in Pompeii have lived with tremors before. They've lived with the memory of the AD 62 quake. And humans in every era have the same reaction to repeated warnings. If it didn't kill me last time, it probably won't kill me this time. So they adapt. They shrug. They make jokes. They keep working. And then the morning comes. The day that will become immortal. We don't know the exact date with perfect certainty. Scholars debate late August versus October, but we know the hour will matter more than the month. Because the first phase begins around early afternoon. The sky is clear. The air is warm. Everything feels normal. Then people hear a sound. Not a tremor. Not a crack of thunder. A roar that is deeper than anything natural. A roar that feels like the earth itself is ripping open. People stop walking. They look around. They listen. And then they look toward Vesuvius. At first, it doesn't register. Because what they're seeing doesn't look like a typical storm. It looks like a tree growing into the sky. A massive column of ash and rock rising straight upward. Darkening. Expanding. Climbing higher than any cloud they've ever seen. Pliny the Younger later describes it like a pine tree, tall trunk, spreading canopy, because that's what it looked like from a distance. A tower with a crown. And in that moment, the city's confidence begins to crack. Because mountains aren't supposed to do that. The air begins filling with ash. Fine particles drifting down like gray snow. At first, some people are curious. They touch it. They watch it. They speak in nervous jokes. But then the ash thickens. The sunlight dims. People feel it in their throats. They blink it from their eyes. And somewhere in the city, someone makes a decision. We should leave. But leaving is not simple. Because nobody has a map of safe paths. Nobody has a warning system. Nobody has been trained for this. And people don't flee as one unit. They argue. They hesitate. They gather valuables. They lock doors. They look for family members. They waste precious minutes doing the most human thing possible. Trying to preserve a normal life. In the middle of an ending. This is the background turning into the first stage of catastrophe. The moment the city shifts from routine to uncertainty. Because the eruption hasn't even reached its worst phase yet. And already, Pompeii is entering a countdown. The first hours of the eruption feel like the world is changing its mind. Ash falls softly at first. Light and gray. Almost harmless. It lands on shoulders, on hair, on market stalls, on rooftops. People step outside and look up, shielding their eyes. Some laugh nervously. Some point toward the mountain. Some begin praying. Because what else do you do when the sky starts dropping powder? But the soft ash is only the beginning. The column above Vesuvius continues rising, higher, darker, thicker. And then the falling changes. The ash becomes heavier. It sticks in the throat. It turns sunlight into a dull orange haze. And then the stones begin to fall. Pumice. White and gray chunks of volcanic rock, light enough to float in water, but heavy enough to smash through tile roofs. At first they bounce. Then they pile up. And that's when the terror becomes physical. Because now the sky isn't just gray. It's violent. Each impact hits rooftops like hammer blows. Clack, clack, clack. People look up and realize something horrifying. The eruption isn't a distant event. It's raining onto them. And Pompeii is not built for this. The roofs are tiled, designed for sunshine and rain, not for hours of falling stone. So the city enters a new rhythm. And as pumice accumulates, roofs begin to sag. Some collapse suddenly, burying rooms beneath rubble. People scream. Families pull each other out of doorways. Dust fills the air. The streets become chaos. Now the city has to decide. Stay or flee. And here is where Pompeii's tragedy splits into thousands of smaller tragedies. Some people flee immediately toward the sea, hoping ships will take them away. Others flee toward open countryside, thinking distance will save them. But the roads are clogged. The ash makes breathing harder. The pumice makes walking unstable. And every tremor shakes buildings around them. Some people stay inside homes. They think walls will protect them. They close shutters. They gather in courtyards. They sit under arches. They wait. But waiting becomes dangerous. Because pumice doesn't stop falling. It keeps building up on roofs. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to leave. And Pompeii's streets, once full of trade, become choking corridors of ash. Visibility drops. The sky darkens so quickly that it feels like evening, even though it's still daytime. Torches are lit. People carry lamps. Shadows move strangely across the smoke-filled city. Animals panic. Horses refuse to move. Dogs howl. And then something else begins, something that turns fear into pure dread. The eruption cloud begins producing lightning. Not normal storm lightning. Volcanic lightning. Blue-white flashes inside the ash column, like the sky is tearing open repeatedly. Every flash reveals the city for a split second. Faces coated in ash. People running. Buildings collapsing. Then darkness again. It's like living inside a flickering nightmare. Now the air becomes almost unbreathable. Ash coats tongues. People cough violently. Some choke. Some wrap cloth around their faces. Some soak cloth in water or wine, believing it will help. But breathing is still painful. And the sound becomes constant. Not just the impacts on rooftops. A deep roar from Vesuvius, like a giant breathing. The mountain does not stop. It does not pause. It continues pouring its fury into the sky. And people begin to realize this isn't a short event. This isn't a tremor. This isn't a passing storm. This is sustained. Relentless. A catastrophe that doesn't care if you're tired. As the hours pass, Pompeii becomes buried in layers of pumice and ash. Streets rise. Doorways become blocked. Some buildings are half covered. People trying to flee now must climb over debris. The city becomes an obstacle course of collapsing walls and falling stones. And that's when the most dangerous choices appear. Some people choose to leave everything and run, barefoot, empty-handed, desperate. Others choose to save wealth. They gather coins, jewelry, valuables. They tie them into cloth bundles. Because they believe if they survive, wealth matters. But those bundles slow them. And every minute matters. You can almost feel the city reaching a tipping point, because the eruption is still in its first stage. The pumice fall. The roof collapses. The choking ash. This is not yet the thing that ends Pompeii completely. This is the slow torture. The hours of fear. The hours of decision. The hours where you might still escape. If you choose correctly. But how do you choose correctly when you don't understand the disaster? Some people look toward the sea and see waves strange and pulled back, as if the ocean itself is reacting. Some hear louder booms from the mountain. Some feel tremors growing stronger. And in the darkening daylight, the city begins to feel haunted. Like nature is speaking in a language nobody can translate. And that is what makes the conflict trigger so devastating. Pompeii is not defeated instantly. It is trapped inside hours of escalating horror, where every person must decide what to do with incomplete information. And the wrong decision doesn't just cost comfort. It costs life. Hours into the eruption, Pompeii no longer feels like a city. It feels like a maze made of fear. The ash in the air thickens until every breath tastes like dust and stone. Pumice piles up so high that the streets begin rising, swallowing curbs, steps, and doorways. And the sky, once bright, has turned into a heavy ceiling. A dim, choking darkness where lightning flashes like camera shutters, briefly revealing terror, then hiding it again. The city's sounds have changed. The marketplace is gone. The laughter is gone. Now it's only shouting, coughing, the crash of collapsing roofs. And beneath it all, the constant roar of Vesuvius, like a giant engine that never shuts off. People move in groups now, not because they want company, but because loneliness feels like death. Families cling together, hands locked, pulling children forward through ash. Others are already separated. A mother calls a name and hears nothing back. A man searches the street for his wife and finds only dust. And in this confusion, time becomes distorted. Minutes feel like hours. Because survival demands constant decisions. Turn left or right. Stay under an archway or run across open street. Go toward the sea or toward the hills. Every choice feels like gambling with a life you didn't expect to lose today. And then roofs begin collapsing more frequently. At first, a roof collapse is rare, one loud crash across the city. But as pumice accumulates, collapses become constant. Like a drumbeat, people learn to fear the sound of cracking beams. Because cracking means the building is about to become a tomb. Some run out of homes at the last second, coughing, covered in ash. Others never make it out. And the tragedy is that the city cannot mourn. There's no time. There's only survival. So bodies are stepped over. Not because people are cruel, but because stopping means dying too. The streets themselves become dangerous. Pumice shifts beneath feet, making walking unstable. It's like trying to run through deep gravel. Each step sinks. Each step slips. Some fall. And if you fall, you can't breathe. Ash fills your mouth. You choke. Panic explodes. Someone tries to lift you, then realizes helping you might trap them too. And those small moral crises, help or run, multiply everywhere. Meanwhile, the darkness grows heavier. At some point, people can barely see beyond a few feet. They rely on torches, lamps, and instinct. But even torches begin failing as ash clogs flame. The air is thick and turbulent. Wind drives ash into faces. People's eyes become swollen. Tears mix with soot. And then the city starts hearing new sounds from the mountain. Not just a roar. A deeper rumble. Like a beast moving inside the earth. The tremors grow stronger. Some buildings already weakened by the AD 62 earthquake begin cracking again. Walls shake. Statues wobble. Columns groan. And for those still in Pompeii, this is the moment where fear crosses into something worse. The sense that the world is not just falling apart, it's transforming. At the coastline, people trying to flee by sea face another horror. The water behaves strangely. Boats struggle. The shore becomes crowded with desperate people pushing against each other, begging to board anything that floats. But there are not enough boats. And even if there were, the ash cloud above the bay makes visibility dangerous. The sea is not a clean escape. It's chaos. So some turn back. Some run inland. Some freeze, unable to decide. The city becomes a funnel of indecision, panic, and exhaustion. And then, through the darkness, a new danger announces itself. Not with a falling stone, but with heat. A sudden warm gust through ash-choked air. Subtle at first. Like opening an oven door in the distance. People feel it on their skin. They notice it because the air was cooler earlier, filled with dust and night. Now it's warmer. Wrong. That warmth is a warning. Because it means the eruption has begun shifting. The column is destabilizing. The mountain is preparing something far deadlier than falling pumice. This is where modern volcanology helps us understand the horror. Vesuvius isn't just throwing rocks. It's building up a towering column of ash and gas. And that column cannot stay up forever. When it collapses, it creates pyroclastic flows. Superheated avalanches of gas and ash racing downhill. Faster than horses. Faster than human reflexes. And for the people of Pompeii, they have no idea such a thing exists. So as the heat grows, and the mountain's sound deepens, and tremors shake the city, Pompeii continues doing what trapped humans always do. Trying to survive the danger they can see, while the real danger approaches unseen. This is the buildup. The city buried in darkness. People trapped by debris. Breathing ash. Making desperate decisions. And somewhere above them, the column of Vesuvius wavers. Unstable. Ready to fall. As night settles fully over Pompeii, the darkness is so complete that people can't tell where the horizon is. The sky and earth blend into one choking ceiling of ash. Torches flicker weakly, their flames struggling against the thick air. Every surface is coated in gray. Every breath feels borrowed. And for the people still alive inside the city, the biggest question is no longer, will this stop? The question is, how long can we last like this? Some have fled already, but many are still trapped. Some by rubble, some by exhaustion, some because they believed their home would protect them. Families gather under strong arches, in interior rooms, beneath staircases, in courtyards. They huddle close, not out of comfort, but because the world outside feels like death. In the darkness, people begin hearing the city die around them. A roof collapses somewhere with a crushing roar. A building next to it responds with a crack like bone. Then another. And in between the collapses, there are screams. Then silence. Because the city cannot echo forever. Ash swallows sound. It muffles everything, like the city has been wrapped in a burial cloth. The eruption continues all night. Pumice stones keep falling. Not as violently as the peak, but steadily enough to keep piling. And as they pile, doorways become blocked. Streets become trenches. Some people trying to flee now find themselves walking through chest-high debris. They climb, stumble, fall. They can't tell if they're moving uphill or downhill. They only know they must keep moving. Because to stay still is to be buried. And then something new begins. In the distance, beyond Pompeii, the first pyroclastic surges start striking other towns closer to Vesuvius. Places like Herculaneum. And those surges are not ash rain. They are death waves. Superheated clouds of gas and volcanic material rushing down the slopes at terrifying speed. They move like storms made of fire. And they kill instantly. In Pompeii, the people don't see these surges yet. But they feel hints. More tremors. Stronger. More frequent. The ground shaking as if something enormous is moving underground. And the air grows warmer again. Not comfortably warm. Heavy. Like the breath of a furnace carried on wind. The ash cloud above Vesuvius begins shifting. The tall column that had been rising like a black tree becomes unstable. It begins collapsing in pulses. And each collapse sends a new surge down the mountain. And each surge brings Pompeii closer to finality. Some people in the city interpret the heat and tremors as divine anger. They pray desperately. Others curse the gods. Some call for their families. Some try to push through debris toward the gates. And then there are those who freeze. Because fear can do that. It can lock you in place. It can make you wait for instruction that never arrives. Pompeii becomes a city full of waiting. Waiting for the sky to clear. Waiting for the stones to stop. Waiting for the noise to end. Waiting for daylight. But daylight does not bring relief. Because the eruption is still ongoing. And now the smoke and ash above the region begins drifting and collapsing in waves. The air grows thick with sulfur. Breathing becomes harder. People's throats burn. Some begin vomiting from inhaling ash and gas. And if you're already weak, already dehydrated, already panicked, that breathing difficulty becomes fatal. A person collapses. They try to inhale. They breathe dust. Their lungs seize. Those around them watch and realize the body has limits. And those limits are being reached everywhere. The streets are now filled with people moving like ghosts. Faces coated gray. Hair heavy with ash. Eyes red and swollen. Some carrying bundles of valuables. Some carrying children. Some carrying nothing but fear. And the city's geography changes under their feet. Pumice piles reshape streets. Walls collapse and create new dead ends. Some people try to return home for shelter. But their home is gone. Or blocked. Or crushed under rubble. And at some point in the night, the only reliable shelter becomes one thing. Because no one knows where safety is anymore. No one knows which street will collapse next. No one knows which building will still stand. No one knows when the surge will arrive. There is a moment described in Pliny's account, though he was not in Pompeii itself, where darkness becomes so deep that people cannot tell if they are alive inside the world or buried in a tomb. They shout to each other. They hold on to one another. They believe they are at the end of time. And in Pompeii, that feeling becomes reality. Because the end is approaching. The first surges have already destroyed places nearer the mountain. And each surge weakens the column further. Each surge pushes the eruption into its most lethal phase. Pompeii has survived the slow horror of ash and falling stone. But the final horror will not be slow. It will be fast. It will be hot. And it will be absolute. And somewhere in the city, a family hears a new sound. A low, rushing roar. Not from the sky. From the direction of the mountain. Wind. But heavier. Like a storm. But faster. And they don't know what it is. They only know it feels like the world is coming toward them. By early morning, Pompeii is no longer fighting a storm. It is fighting the mountain itself. The Ashfall has already buried the city in layers. Rooftops have collapsed. Streets have become trenches. Air has become dust. But still, some people are alive. Some are huddled in rooms, hands over mouths. Some are moving through darkness, trying to find a way out. Some have reached the gates and pushed into the countryside. And some are trapped, physically or mentally, waiting for it to end. And then it happens. The thing that makes Pompeii immortal. The eruption column collapses. Not gently. Not slowly. It collapses like a tower falling. And when it collapses, the mountain releases pyroclastic surges. Waves of superheated gas, ash, and volcanic material that move faster than human reaction. These are not flames you can outrun. They are not smoke you can hide from. They are walls of heat and suffocating ash. They do not choose who they kill. They simply arrive. The first surges may not wipe Pompeii instantly. Some are weaker, flowing at the edges of the city. But they are warnings. They carry heat that makes breathing feel like swallowing fire. They carry ash that blinds instantly. They carry a darkness inside them that feels like the world has been erased. People who encounter the first surge stagger. They cough violently. They collapse. Some survive by chance, because the first surge is not the strongest. But that survival is deceptive, because the surges come in sequence. One after another. Each one more intense. Each one closer. And with each surge, Pompeii loses more of itself. Then the strongest surge arrives. The one that ends it. It comes like a roar that grows louder faster than the brain can process. People hear it and turn. They see nothing, because the darkness is too thick. Then the heat hits. A blast so hot that it can kill instantly. Modern estimates suggest temperatures high enough to cause immediate fatal shock. People don't have time to scream. They don't have time to run. They don't even have time to understand. Their bodies collapse where they stand. Some in doorways. Some in courtyards. Some under staircases. Some in the street, mid-step. And many in positions that show exactly what a human being does when the end is sudden. They cover their faces. They cling to loved ones. They curl inward. They reach. They don't die gracefully. They die instinctively. This is why Pompeii becomes so haunting to later generations. Because it preserves instinct. It preserves panic. It preserves the final shape of human fear. After the surge, the city is silent. Not normal silence. A silence that feels like the air has been drained of life. Ash settles into everything. Heat dissipates slowly. The city becomes buried again, layer over layer. And the people who died do not decompose the way bodies normally do. Because the ash seals them. Their forms are preserved as cavities in hardened volcanic material. Later, when archaeologists pour plaster into those cavities, they reveal what the ash preserved. Faces. Wrinkles in clothing. Even the folds of fabric. A person frozen mid-run. A couple curled together. A dog still chained. And suddenly Pompeii stops being ancient history. It becomes a mirror. Because those bodies look like people you could know. Not statues. Not myths. People. In the immediate aftermath, survivors, Those who manage to flee early enough will tell stories. They will say the sky went black. They will say it rained stone. They will say the earth shook endlessly. They will say the air burned their lungs. And they will say something that appears again and again in ancient accounts of catastrophes. They thought it was the end of the world, because for Pompeii it was. The city is buried so completely that it disappears from memory. Fields grow above it. Vines are planted above it. People live above it without knowing there is a dead city under their feet. Centuries pass. Empires rise and fall. The Roman world collapses. A new world forms. And Pompeii remains sealed, waiting. Then, in the modern era, Pompeii is rediscovered. Excavations begin. And as the streets are uncovered, something shocking happens. The ancient world feels too close. Graffiti still on walls. Paint still on frescoes. Bread still in ovens. Amphorae still stacked. Coins still in boxes. It's like walking into a city where everyone just left. Except they didn't leave. They died. So Pompeii becomes one of the most valuable archaeological sites on Earth. Not because it is grand, but because it is ordinary. Because it shows daily life in the Roman world. What people ate. What they drank. What they joked about. How they decorated their homes. How they argued and loved and lived. And it shows something else. How fast everything can end. This is the deeper meaning of Pompeii. It is not only a disaster story. It is a story about human psychology inside catastrophe. Because even at the end, people behave like humans everywhere. They hesitate. They gather valuables. They cling to family. They hope it will pass. They underestimate the scale. They try to preserve normalcy. They don't leave early enough. And nature does not care. The volcano does not care that Pompeii has bakeries and temples and beautiful art. It does not care that children are sleeping. It does not care that families are hiding behind walls. It releases energy without emotion. And the city becomes a lesson. A city turned into evidence. Because in Pompeii, we don't just know that a disaster happened. We can see where people stood when it happened. We can see their last attempts to escape. We can see their last decisions. We can see the exact moment the sky fell. And that is why Pompeii still haunts the modern imagination. Not because it is ancient. Because it is familiar. Because it whispers. If it happened to them, it can happen to anyone. Pompeii's story should have ended in ash. A city destroyed. A tragedy swallowed by time. But history rarely behaves the way we expect. Because Pompeii's death becomes the very reason Pompeii survives. That's the twist. The volcano didn't just kill the city. It preserved it. When Vesuvius buried Pompeii, it sealed it like a vault. Not a clean vault. A grave. But a grave that locked the city away from weather, war, and the slow erosion that destroys most ancient places. Rome itself would change. Empires would fall. Barbarians would come. Churches would rise. Kings would replace emperors. And Pompeii would remain under the earth, untouched. Like a scene trapped in time. For centuries, people walk above Pompeii without knowing it. Farmers plant fields. Children play. Villagers build homes. They don't realize there's an entire Roman city under their feet. Streets, temples, villas, even the shapes of human bodies, waiting. Then, in the modern era, the earth begins to give up its secret. In the 1700s, excavation begins in the area around Vesuvius, driven by curiosity, treasure hunting, and the rising hunger of Europe to understand the ancient world. At first, it's not a careful archaeological mission. It's digging. It's pulling art out of the earth. It's the early phase of discovery where people don't yet understand what they're uncovering. But as trenches deepen, something becomes obvious. This isn't a scattered ruin. This is a city. A whole city. With roads. Sidewalks. Shops. A forum. Bathhouses. Homes. Graffiti. You could walk down a street and imagine the voices. You could step into a house and see painted walls. You could stand in a courtyard and picture dinner being served. And suddenly, Pompeii stops being Roman history. It becomes life, paused. And then they find the most haunting evidence. In hardened ash layers, excavators discover hollow spaces, Voids where bodies decomposed but left their shape behind. A cavity shaped like a person. A cavity shaped like a dog. A cavity shaped like someone curled, arms wrapped around their face. At first, they don't understand what they're seeing. Then a technique emerges: pour plaster into the cavities. Let it harden. Remove the ash. And what emerges is one of the most chilling artifacts in human history. A human being in the exact position they died. Not an artistic sculpture. Not a myth. A last moment. A final posture. A frozen panic. A person shielding their mouth. A mother curled around a child. A man collapsed in the street. A dog still chained, twisted in agony. The casts are not just science. They are emotional weapons. Because they remove distance. They make the past impossible to ignore. They make ancient people feel like modern people. Because fear looks the same in every century. And as Pompeii is uncovered, something else becomes clear. This city is not a palace city. It's not just emperors and generals. It's ordinary Roman life. That's what makes it priceless. You see bakeries with ovens. You see loaves of bread carbonized into shape. You see taverns. You see wine jars. You see inscriptions on walls, dirty jokes, political slogans, insults. You see beds. You see cookware. You see beauty routines. You see brothels, explicit paintings, advertisements. You see evidence of slavery, wealth, social inequality, ambition. Pompeii becomes a time machine to everyday life. And in many ways, it becomes the most vivid window into the Roman world ever found. But here's the deeper twist. Pompeii isn't just preserved, it also exposes the final hours in terrifying detail. Archaeologists can track where people tried to flee. They can see clusters of bodies, places where people gathered, thinking they were safe. They can see who stayed indoors and who ran. They can find coins and jewelry clutched in hands. They can see the remains of doors that people tried to break through. And these details reveal something chilling. Many of the people of Pompeii did not die instantly. They endured hours. Hours of ash. Hours of darkness. Hours of fear. And for those trapped, it wasn't one dramatic blast. It was a slow nightmare, followed by a sudden ending. This is why Pompeii feels cinematic to modern audiences. It has everything. The calm before the storm. The slow build. The rising panic. The darkness. And then the unstoppable wave that ends it. But it also has something else. A moral sting. Because Pompeii forces us to see how civilization is always one disaster away from silence. Pompeii was confident, comfortable, busy, and then it vanished. Not because Rome collapsed. Not because of invasion. Because nature decided the terms. And the irony is cruel. Pompeii becomes famous because it died. The city that disappeared becomes one of the most remembered cities in human history. And the human beings trapped there, whose names are mostly unknown, become the most intimate faces of ancient Rome. That's the turning point. Pompeii shifts from disaster to revelation, from death to preservation, from end to evidence. And once you understand that, the story becomes bigger than one eruption. Because it becomes a question. If a city can be frozen in tragedy, what does it teach us about our own world? Now we do something different. Because you can talk about Pompeii in facts and timelines, and still miss the most important truth. Pompeii wasn't a statistic. It was a city full of individual people who experienced this disaster one breath at a time. So let's walk through the final day again. Not as a summary, but as if we are there. Not with fantasy. With research-grounded reality. Imagine you're in Pompeii that morning. The air is warm. You hear the market outside. You smell bread baking. You step into the street and feel the sun on your face. Vesuvius sits in the distance like it always has. You don't think about it. Because human beings are built for routine. Routine is safety. Then the ground trembles lightly. Just enough to notice. A few people stop walking. A jar rattles on a table. Someone laughs and says it's nothing. Because tremors happen. Because they always stop. And then, around early afternoon, the sound arrives. A roar. A deep, unnatural roar that doesn't sound like thunder and doesn't sound like an earthquake. It sounds like the sky cracking. You look up, and across the city, people freeze in place. Heads turn. Eyes widen. And then you see it. Above Vesuvius, a black column is climbing into the sky. Not drifting. Climbing. It rises like a giant tree trunk, then blooms outward like a canopy. It's so large that your mind rejects it at first. Because you've never seen anything like it. Someone says, it's smoke. Someone says, it's a storm. Someone says, the gods are angry. But you don't hear them clearly anymore. Because you're staring at something that feels impossible. Then ash begins to fall. Soft at first. Dusting hair and shoulders. People hold out their hands like it's snow. Children laugh. A man wipes his forehead, leaving a gray streak. And if it stayed like this, maybe the city would survive. But it doesn't stay like this. The ash thickens. The air grows dim. The sun dulls. And the city begins to smell strange. Sulfur, hot stone, something sharp. People begin coughing. The sky takes on a heavy, dirty color. Then the first pumice stones fall. Light rocks at first. They bounce off rooftops. People flinch. They step under awnings. They pull cloaks over their heads. Then the pumice becomes heavier. More frequent. It begins striking rooftops with sharp clacks. Like thousands of hands tapping tiles. And those taps turn to cracks. A roof on one street collapses. A deep crunch. A scream. Then dust rises. People begin running. Now the fear spreads faster than the ash. Because the city realizes the sky is not simply dirty. It is dangerous. And the most terrifying part is how quickly the logic collapses. Should you flee? Should you stay? If you flee, which direction? Toward the sea? Toward the fields? Toward the hills? No one has a plan. No one has practiced this. The disaster is beyond experience. So people do what humans always do. They gather valuables. They grab coins, jewelry, documents. They secure their money because money is survival. They shout for their children. They call for relatives. They lock doors. Because locking doors is habit. A ritual of normal life. Performed in an abnormal moment. And this is where Pompeii loses time. Minutes disappear into hesitation. Families argue. A father says, we leave now. A mother says, wait, we need. A child cries. Someone goes to fetch something precious. And then another roof collapses. The streets fill with people. Shouting. The pumice piles higher, turning streets into gravel seas. Walking becomes difficult. Each step sinks. The stones shift underfoot. People trip. Someone falls and can't breathe. Ash in the mouth. Panic. A stranger pulls them up, then releases them quickly because helping too long feels dangerous. Because danger is now everywhere. As the hours pass, the world darkens. Not like sunset. Like a curtain. The sky becomes a ceiling of ash. Lightning flashes inside it, blue-white bursts that make faces appear and disappear in strobe-like terror. For a moment, the city is lit. You see people coated gray, moving like ghosts. Then the darkness returns. And in the darkness, the mountain's roar is constant. Somewhere, a temple bell rings. Someone is praying loudly. Another person screams at the sky. The air becomes harder to breathe. Ash coats the tongue. Eyes burn. Some wrap cloth around their mouths, soaking it in water or wine. But it only helps a little. Because the air itself is becoming poison. Now the panic becomes exhaustion. People have been running, coughing, and carrying weight for hours. Children are crying and slowing. Elderly people struggle. Some families decide to shelter. They duck into homes, courtyards, bathhouses, any structure that feels solid. They think they can wait it out. They believe the eruption will stop. Because storms stop. Earthquakes stop. Most disasters have an end. So they wait. But the pumice continues falling. It piles on roofs. And roofs are groaning. And the longer they wait, the more trapped they become. Doors become blocked by stones. Streets become impassable. And at some point, the simple act of leaving becomes impossible. This is where Pompeii becomes a trap. Because the city is not just experiencing disaster, it's being buried alive. Outside, those who flee toward the sea see the coastline crowded with desperate figures. People pushing toward boats. People shouting. The water is strange. Waves behave oddly under pressure changes and tremors. Some boats leave. Most can't. And the ash cloud makes navigation terrifying. Inland, those who flee toward the countryside struggle through darkness and falling stone. Some survive. Some don't. But for those still inside Pompeii, the night becomes unbearable. The darkness is absolute. People can't see. They can only hear. Roof collapses. Screams. Then silence. And then something changes. The air becomes warmer. Not a little warmer. Wrong warmer. Like opening an oven door. A gust that carries heat through ash. Some people feel it and freeze. Because heat in the middle of ash fall feels unnatural. It feels like a warning. But they don't know what it warns of. They don't know the eruption column is collapsing. They don't know pyroclastic surges are beginning to sweep down. They don't know towns closer to the mountain have already been erased. And then, in the early morning, they hear a new sound. A rushing roar. Not falling stones. Not thunder. Something moving fast. Something heavy. And in the darkness, people turn toward the sound and feel a sudden terror so sharp it almost feels like clarity. This is the end. The surge arrives. A wall of heat and ash moving faster than the body can run. Breathing becomes impossible. The air burns. The world becomes black. People drop where they stand. Some cover their faces. Some clutch children. Some curl into themselves. Not because they understand what's happening, but because the body's final instinct is to protect what it can. And then silence. The city is buried. And the final cruelty is that the destruction is so complete that no one can even bury the dead. The volcano does it for them. Pompeii becomes a sealed moment in time. A city turned into a snapshot of humanity facing unstoppable force. That is the climax. Not just the eruption. The human experience inside it. The ordinary life turning into apocalypse in hours. After Pompeii is buried, the world moves on. That's one of the coldest truths in history. Disasters feel like the center of the universe to the people inside them. But the larger world keeps spinning. Rome continues ruling. Armies march. Merchants trade. Politics continue. And Pompeii, one city among many, disappears beneath the earth like it never existed. For a while, there are survivors. People who escaped early enough. People who lost family members, lost homes, lost their entire lives in a single night. Some flee to Naples or other towns. Some start over. Some tell stories. But without the city itself, those stories eventually fade into legend. And the land above Pompeii begins to change. Ash hardens. Soil forms. Vines and trees grow. Fields are cultivated. New buildings appear. And Pompeii becomes invisible. Then centuries pass. 1,000 years, then more. By the time Europe begins waking into the modern era, Pompeii is gone from living memory. But it's still there, waiting. And when it is rediscovered, the impact becomes global. Because Pompeii is not rediscovered like most ruins. Most ancient sites are broken, looted, weathered, reduced to foundations and scattered stones. Pompeii is different. Pompeii is preserved like a photograph. And what it leaves behind is more than artifacts. It leaves behind something that changes our understanding of Rome. Everyday life. Before Pompeii, the Roman world was often studied through emperors, generals, laws, and monuments. Pompeii gives us the other side of the empire. The ordinary. The intimate. The private. When archaeologists uncover Pompeii, they uncover bakeries with ovens. They find loaves of bread, carbonized in shape. They find cups, bowls, cooking pots. They find the layout of homes, where families ate, slept, bathed, and argued. They find street signs, shops, graffiti. And the graffiti is one of the most important discoveries of all. Because graffiti is raw human voice. Not literature. Not official propaganda. Jokes. Love notes. Political slogans. It shows that Roman people were not distant marble statues. They were loud, messy, funny, cruel, affectionate, and alive. Pompeii gives historians evidence of class structure too. You can see the wealthy villas with their frescoes and gardens. And you can see the cramped spaces behind shops where poorer workers lived. You can see slavery without needing to imagine it, because the physical space shows who served and who was served. You can see how wealth was displayed. You can see how status worked. You can see how a Roman town functioned. And then there are the bodies. The plaster casts. They are the most haunting legacy of Pompeii, because they transform archaeology into empathy. They show people in poses of fear, cowering, covering mouths, clinging to loved ones, their final movement frozen into stone. These casts are powerful because they erase the illusion that ancient people were somehow different from us. You can stand in front of one and feel the same thought every visitor feels. They didn't know they were going to die. They were living a normal day. And then disaster arrived. Pompeii also reshapes how we understand volcanic disasters. Modern volcanology uses the eruption layers to reconstruct the sequence. The early ashfall, the pumice rain, the roof collapses, the pyroclastic surges. The site becomes a scientific archive, not just a historical one. It teaches us about warning signs, eruption behavior, and human response. And this is the resolution of Pompeii's story. Pompeii doesn't come back to life, but it becomes a message, a preserved warning about the fragility of civilization, a reminder that cities feel permanent until they aren't. Pompeii becomes one of the most visited archaeological sites on Earth because it offers something rare, a direct link to real people, not emperors, not generals, ordinary individuals. And that makes the tragedy feel personal, even 2,000 years later, even across language, culture, and time. It's a city that tells us what the Romans ate, how they laughed, how they insulted each other, and how they died. And by doing that, Pompeii gives us something strange. It gives the dead a voice, not through words, but through preservation. And the final emotional note is this. Pompeii shows us the cruel paradox of history. A city becomes immortal because it was destroyed. Pompeii is ancient, but the lesson is modern, because the real story isn't just a volcano. It's human behavior in the face of danger. The first modern lesson is about normalcy bias. That instinct people have to assume tomorrow will be like yesterday. Pompeii had warning signs, tremors, strange shifts, a massive earthquake years earlier. But people lived there anyway, because the mountain had been quiet for generations. And when a danger becomes familiar, the mind stops treating it as danger. You see the same thing today. People live near fault lines, near coasts threatened by hurricanes, near wildfire zones, near volcanoes, because the threat feels abstract until the day it becomes real. Pompeii shows what happens when abstract becomes immediate. The second lesson is about decision paralysis. In disasters, the people who survive are often the ones who leave early. Not because they are braver, because they are faster at accepting the truth. Pompeii's tragedy is full of hesitation. People gathering valuables. People trying to save belongings. People waiting for clarity. But disasters rarely provide clarity. They provide pressure. And pressure rewards quick decision-making. The third lesson is about invisible thresholds. Pompeii's eruption has stages. Pumice. Roof collapse. But the most lethal stage, the pyroclastic surge, doesn't look like the danger people expect. It arrives fast, hot, and unstoppable. Modern volcanology teaches that some volcanoes can kill in minutes, even if earlier stages feel survivable. That's why evacuation planning matters. And why understanding volcanic risk is crucial for modern cities near active volcanoes. Because Vesuvius is still there. Still active. Still capable of erupting again. And today, millions of people live in the Naples region, which makes Pompeii not just a story of the past, but a warning for the future. The fourth lesson is about how disasters reshape memory. Pompeii became iconic because it was preserved, but many other ancient tragedies vanished without evidence. Pompeii survived because it was sealed. which means many disasters throughout history were forgotten simply because the evidence disappeared. So Pompeii is a reminder that history is selective. We remember what we can find, and we find what was preserved. Finally, Pompeii shows the fragility of civilization itself. Pompeii was not a primitive village. It was organized, comfortable, connected, and yet it was helpless against the mountain. Not because they lacked intelligence, because knowledge hadn't reached them yet. And that's what makes Pompeii feel relevant today. Because we live in a world of complex systems. We feel protected by technology, but nature still has forces beyond control. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing is not ignorance. It's confidence. The confidence that nothing will happen, because nothing has happened before. Pompeii teaches humility. It teaches preparation. It teaches that the most terrifying disasters are often the ones people don't believe can happen, until they do. And that was Pompeii. The day a city lived through its last sunrise. Without knowing it. A place full of laughter, commerce, family, and routine. Swallowed in hours by a force no human could negotiate with. And the haunting truth is this. Pompeii didn't die because it was weak. It died because it didn't understand what was coming. If you enjoyed this kind of immersive, suspenseful history storytelling, where you don't just learn what happened, you feel like you're there, make sure you subscribe, because we're diving into more one-hour stories where history becomes a thriller. Next, we're telling another real-time disaster story, a ship called Titanic, a night of ice, arrogance, and panic, and the moments where decisions determined who lived and who didn't. If you want that story, subscribe now. And if you made it all the way through Pompeii, comment the word H. I read the comments. And it tells me you want more long-form cinematic history, where the past feels alive.